let's talk a little bit about kind of some more advanced or more fringe sound design techniques. We've talked before about subtractive synthesis, FM synthesis, wavetable synthesis, and all of those processes involve generating a waveform and then using filters or other waveforms to manipulate the timbre or the harmonics of that waveform. But there are other kind of interesting ways of generating that source material that don't involve a lot of this, what we'll call semi-destructive processes, because you're really you're introducing distortion to a signal every step along the way. Distortion being used in the most broad sense here of changing a signal to something else. If I have altered the signal of this waveform and I get this different waveform, that is technically a distortion of that wave. But you can create that process by doing a little bit of really cool math. I'm going to open up a few different things here. First, I need to grab phase plant. I need to grab actually this synth called Razor. And then I need to grab operator. And we talked about this a little bit with FM synthesis. We talked about this a little bit with wavetable synthesis. But both of those types of synthesis can involve what we would call an additive process. What we're going to talk about right now is called additive synthesis. If I just play a sine wave with operator, you can hear kind of this consistent tone. I'll bring it up an octave so it's a little bit more audible. Now, on operator, you have this little pen tool that shows up with all of these bars that can kind of change how many bars there are visible in a line. And as I hold this note and start clicking in here, now, as I went up and added in each one of those little nodes, you could hear a different note being played. Boom, dun, 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 and kind of goes up. It might sound kind of familiar if you've played around with any of these synths yourself, or another good one is like Serum has this in the wavetable editor. It's that little grid at the top. I can show that in just a second. And then same exact process here. If I go ahead and just, you can see right there, I'll just turn all these off. Go. All right, cool. So now, I really like Serum for this because it makes the waveform really nice and clear as to what's going on. How's it going, Psychotic? Psilocybin, what's going on? Going back just to operator, if I play the note that we just built, we no longer hear all of those individual notes that we've added up on top of this one starting sine wave. But if I go through and I just start removing all these one by one, and then I start from the second one, do the same thing. Still sounds the same. What if we do this? Sounds like we're high passing it, right? What's happening is at each point, we have a sine wave. Watch. I'll go back to Serum because it's more visual, I guess. But watch the waveform. We have sine wave. Right here, we have another sine wave. At each point, there's a wave. I'm holding the F key right now. So, yeah, this is the harmonic overtone series. We've talked about that in the FM master class, the FM 101 class. We're just climbing up each one of those overtones, and essentially we're constructing them out of sine waves. I've actually built something inside of Phase Plant that replicates this. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to open this up. So this is actually, if I turn this down because it's going to get loud, this is actually a saw wave built out of sine waves. Now it sounds kind of low passed, and that's due to the limitations of Phase Plant. Phase Plant only has up to 30 oscillators in a patch, or 30 generators overall. But as I go up in pitch, let me turn this back down again. It sounds pretty normal. It sounds like almost identical to just, maybe not identical, but to me, it's pretty freaking close. Right underneath this, I have a square wave built out of sine waves, and that sounds pretty close, because a square wave has half the number of harmonics present in the same range. Oops. Yeah, so additive synthesis is, in essence, taking this process and controlling each thing. If I wanted to have a low-pass filter in an additive synth, what would happen under the hood would be, as I low-pass it, I just start turning down all of these sine waves. And most, maybe not most, but the most popular wavetable synthesizers, Phase Plant, Serum, I believe Pigments does this, but I have not checked, so do not quote me on that, okay? I don't have proof. But most wavetable synthesizers use some form of, whoops, wrong one, I'm supposed to click this one down here, use some form of additive generation to create the waveform. That's why last week during the Wavetable Masterclass I said, you know, I'm glossing over a little bit about what's happening under the hood, but you can look at it as if you're taking a sample, moving it down to this fine point of the waveform and scanning through. What's happening under the hood is they're taking all of those and they are adding in this additive analysis. They're taking the sound, deconstructing it into all its different sine waves, and then reconstructing that using this process to get a much cleaner version of that sound. That's why wavetable synthesis is so freaking powerful, because it's combining these two very, very powerful processes of sound generation and makes it in a pretty resource-light system. But let's look at an actual additive synth, because this is kind of the microcosm, this is kind of the macrocosm, but what actually is an additive synth that you can use? If you are in FL Studio, or if you use a Windows PC, you can use image line synthesizer Harmor. Harmor is a really powerful additive synthesizer. You have control over every single harmonic. As you can see, I'm on a Mac. I'm using Ableton. I am as far away from using image line products as you can possibly be. So I'm going to use a reactor synth called Razor. So it sounds like a low-passed saw wave right now. As I move this cutoff up, that sounds just like a saw wave, right? If I move this over to pulse, it sounds just like a square wave. But look at what happens in this visual display as I move between pulse and saw, or square and saw. What happens under the hood is that every single sine wave is being individually controlled. As I move down this cutoff, what it's saying is turn up the volume right here, turn down the volume right here on those sine waves. The ramifications of that are subtle yet powerful. To explain how that works, let's go back to Serum. Let's think about how I can show this. Well, what we can do is we can actually look at it in Spectre. So let me open up Spectre real quick. I want you to keep an eye on these two grids. This middle one right here and this bottom left one right here, because that'll be the most visual displays. I'm going to grab Serum. I'm going to pull it over here. And I am going, I guess I could also move the Ableton over here for a second. And I'm going to just pull a saw wave, or pull a low pass filter down on a saw wave. All right. Now, do you see what's happening to this shape right here? You see how it's moving back and forth slightly? We've actually affected the phase of the signal. How's it going, Ryan? And we have started to introduce any sort of like imperfections into the phase of the signal. And you can even see like this little blip right here. Let me do that same exact process in Razor. Keep an eye on what happens. That's a very different shape for the same exact sound. The more you stack on top of your process, the more this will get exaggerated. If I started doing filtration on top of distortion, on top of, say, a comb filter, like watch what happens when I do a comb filter inside of Serum. I'm going to switch from a low pass to a comb right now. A lot of weird shapes out of that, right? It sounds cool as shit. Let's do a comb filter on Razor and see what that sounds like. Look at how much more consistent the waveform is. And that's with the resonance boosted even more. We could even reset the phases. Now you get so much more motion with so much less artifacting or aliasing or phase. The real benefit of additive synthesis is how clean everything sounds. You can push everything so much further. because everything is functioning inside the sine wave process. There's all of this involves just like doing math. How does a sine wave move in this place? How does that sine wave move in that place? The big drawback to additive synthesis is how much it costs on your CPU, right? Because if we go back to Serum for a second, and we start doing like a, you know, low pass filter, let's set it up to be close to the same. We'll do a formant filter. In here, we'll do a comb filter, a little bit of boost, not drive, just try and get it. Maybe a little bit of multiband. We're looking at like 8 or 9% CPU usage while it's playing. Like it's pretty clean in terms of CPU usage, even if it's a bit dirty in terms of phase. Let's make that same sound in Reactor. Looking at, I mean, I can't get the exact same sound technically, but like it's not a huge boost, but as we go, I feel like we would end up with way more kind of CPU hits, because you have to process each thing. Like if I started throwing on like an OTT onto the channel, it would end up probably jumping. Yeah, we're getting up to like 14-15% now. So this is the sort of thing where you would tread with caution, or you would want to resample, which we're going to get into next week. Right now, I'm just kind of showing you everything kind of in its MIDI form, but I feel like for all of these sound design techniques, the real power comes once you have the synth rendered down to audio, which is a good segue, I feel like, into our next topic. So let's take a vocal. I have something in here in my 2019, right there, my 2019 sample pack, which, by the way, if you're a sub, you can get in the Discord and the members only channel. And if you subscribe to me on Patreon, if you don't want to subscribe to me on Discord, or on Twitch, you can subscribe to me on Patreon and get access to that as well. But let's get some vocal. Perfect. All right. So now I'm going to load up two different things. First, I'm going to load this into an instrument track. I'm just going to put it into a sampler like this. And then, how's it going, Alabama? I'm going to load up this Max for Live instrument called the Granulator. I'm going to load it into here, because when we talked about wavetable synthesis last week, I mentioned how you can do some wavetable-y stuff just by coming in real close to the waveform, making the loop region nice and tight around a single character. I'm just going to move back here, pull this in like so. And then, if I start changing that position, you can kind of scan through it to make the wave table, so to speak. But what if we modulated how big those grains were? So first thing I want to do is turn off snapping. And set this to be right at the start. I'm going to shrink the loop down quite a bit. Now, I'm going to actually apply a couple of randomized devices here. I'm going to grab an LFO, Natural Live Device, load it in right here. I'm going to set this onto random with a really low depth. So it's not going to change a lot, but that's going to be attached to the sample start point. I don't think I could do that in here. All right, it's okay. I have a workaround. I can do the same exact process in phase plant, and I know I can do this instead of phase plant. All right, so round 2. Let's load this sample up into a sampler. Let's turn on looping, and let's set the loop region to be just at the start, just about the size of a single wave, right? Oh yeah, and I want to set the start time and the offset to be the same. So I'm actually going to link these together with a macro so that they're moving at the same time, because the offset is going to be connected to where the starting point is, like that. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a secondary automation that's on this LFO. I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to set this to both the offset and the start time. I'll do just a little bit. Let's do like 8%. Turn the depth way down. Yeah, that sounds cool. It sounds very funny. And the idea is that what we're really playing with, I'm going intentionally funny for this, I hope you all understand that, is I want to treat this vocal as a bed of, excuse me, what we can call grains. We're taking this sample and we're just chopping it up into these little tiny slices. And we're just seeing how those slices interact. Lupika, thank you so much for the 7-month resub. So think about it as noise as opposed to a sample. That is one way of looking at it. The way that I personally like to look at it, and the reason why I did this after we did additive, is I look at it as a collection of harmonics. It is a sequence of essentially little tiny wave cycles or wave particles, however you want to think about it. I like particles because I like imagining these vocal segments or whatever sample you're working with as like you're getting just these little tiny floating particles of sound waves that are intermingling with each other based on what you're playing. Now, I'm going to use another device here. I'm going to use specifically a random modulator. I'm going to set this up to be perfectly smooth. So this is just going to kind of randomly change the length of these grains, we're going to call them. Now we're seeing what happens when you start to spread those grains. I'm going to click on polyphonic for now, because now I want to start playing with this, using this as kind of a sound bed to work with. Like, let's take this and let's add a little bit of distortion based on every note that we play. I'm actually gonna turn this down a smidge, set this on saturate. And let's set another random modulator that is now attached to macro 1, just to have it kind of move around in the space, just to kind of see. I'm just trying to make sure that it goes back and forth without hitting too far in these sides. Might sound better if we give this a longer attack and release. Maybe slowed this down quite a bit. Maybe give this a reverb. What if I play this nice and high? Ooh. Now, this is obviously a pretty extreme example. If I had something maybe more musical, like let's grab something a bit more like not shit, like something like this. You never cross my mind. Yeah, now we're starting to get to. It's a little bit tight sometimes down here, but. You can get a lot of really cool textures out of it. And if I'm using something that's built for that, like a granular synthesizer, like Granulator, obviously, it can get kind of crazy. But let's grab one of these. Yeah, that is the real power of granular synthesis. You find these little shards. This is, again, why I like to think about things in granular synthesis as kind of like these particles. Is you're creating all these new timbres based on these little fragments, almost like fractals of the source signal. Something like this I chose specifically because it's a meme. It's not what I would consider good granular synthesis sound material. But things like acapellas are really good. Chord loops are really good. Foley is usually pretty good. I'm trying to find a good one. Oh yeah, like let's take that and throw that into a granulator, right? Let's maybe process that with a little bit of filtration, which I think they have in here. I don't know if they actually have a filter. No, they do. Maybe put that into a delay. Put that into a reverb. Yeah, so granular synthesis is at its best in kind of this atmospheric context. You can use it for very aggressive purposes. I've seen people do things like, let's grab a Reese, just to kind of show you maybe a more non-typical usage of it. So let's just grab a Reese bass from our good friend Silent Science. Maybe something with a bit more. Trying to find something with a lot of different motion to it. There we go. Oh yeah. So obviously it's not necessarily just for like cute atmospheric sounds, but it is great for things that feel like they're moving and have a lot of texture and are in and of themselves rather atmospheric. It doesn't have to be spacious, but it can be something like this. You could try putting in like a drum loop. Like let's look for like this. Our good friend Retouch, shout out Retouch if you all know him. You should check him out, Retouch. He's on Twitch. I don't remember. I think his channel is just Retouch, right? And that's just him playing on his djembe. All these really cool textures start to emerge. You could do stuff like put in the amen break. I love granular synthesis. Part of the reason why I saved it kind of for the last bit of what kind of sound design synthesis is because it allows you to take all of these things, all of these different things that we have covered throughout the past few weeks. Subtractive synthesis, FM synthesis, wavetable synthesis, even additive synthesis. It's kind of finagling with all of those, taking the results of those and putting them into a completely new way of interpreting those sounds. Because you can go for full sections of the sound, or you can just go in and make your own synthesizer. I move this around a little bit, get a slightly different tone. Ooh, that's a bit sharp, sorry. But like that's a lead for a track, right? Oh yeah. So I encourage you to not just experiment with the most typical ways of seeing a granulator or a granulizer in general used. Like I believe in FL Studio there's FL Granulizer or Fruity Granulizer. Ableton has a granulator. Most DAWs have some kind of granular synthesis. If not, you can find some good free ones or some good cheap ones out there. Like, take sounds you make and put sounds you make into granulizers. Use that to generate more sounds. And then, what we're going to talk about next week is how you can take all of that shit and do so much more with it. Because this is kind of that in-between step where, you know, we took some sounds that I made myself, we took some sounds that other people made, we took audio files, and we converted that audio file into a new sound source. But what happens when you make a sound and then you mess with that waveform? You take the audio in here and you actually manipulate this stuff and do things with this. But that's for next week. If you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell thing, check out my Patreon, check out my Twitch, where you get to see this stuff live, follow me on Twitter. I'm super close to 1,000 followers. I'm like literally like I guess I'm like 200 people away, but I'm close. So maybe give me a follow there. Thanks so much for watching, and this will be where we cut the video.